we must take it as a wake-up call that if we've been sitting on gold mines, arable lands, our resources, natural resources, mineral resources, the intellectuals who are in this continent, the youth who are the biggest in population, and we thought we have others who can come and help us. No, we should use this time to reorganize ourselves.
Hey, Breakdown family. Here's the deal. African nations are at a crossroads. Leaders are scrambling at the strategy table, trying to make sense of a new chess game. And this time, Trump's tariffs and a global trade war are the opening move. From Ghana to Kenya, South Africa to Zimbabwe, heads of state are speaking out. Some are folding fast, dropping tariffs on U.S. goods in hopes of staying in America's good graces. And others, not so polite. They're rejecting the pressure, calling it economic bullying. So on today's breakdown, we're diving into how African leaders are reacting or responding to Trump's economic offensive and what this moment could mean for the future of U.S.-Africa trade. Now, before we dive in, I want to invite you to be a part of something bigger, because here at Panagenius TV, we're building a space for global Black stories that are told with truth, care, and power. And if this matters to you, and I hope it does, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and consider joining our membership community or dropping a super thanks to support this work. Now let's break it down. For over 2 decades, many African nations have enjoyed preferential trade access to the U.S. through AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It allowed duty-free exports on thousands of goods, from textiles to agriculture to automotive components. For some economies, this wasn't just policy, it was survival, as they built completely new industries around this policy. But AGOA was always a conditional love affair, one based on U.S. approval, political alignment, and a rotating set of benchmarks. And in 2025, it hit a wall. President Trump's return to office came with a familiar message: America first, again. Only this time, he didn't just target China, he came for the global South, including Africa. A blanket 10% tariff imposed on all imports to the U.S. For Africa, this is a visual map of what that looks like. 29 countries got the baseline 10% tariff, which is the gray area, while the remaining 22 countries will face tariffs from 11 to 50%, which is the gold and green areas. This applies to almost all products, excluding a short list of products such as certain critical minerals deemed necessary to the U.S. economy. In one fell swoop, AGOA's benefits were effectively erased, and the economic foundations of several African industries began to wobble. This wasn't just a policy shift, it was a power move, and it left African leaders with a choice: adapt, resist, or reimagine. So far, we've seen a wide range of reactions across the continent. Some leaders are playing it safe, others are standing their ground, and a few are trying to stay flexible, just in case things swing in their favor. But there's one thing all of this shows us: Africa's dependence on external markets is no longer just risky, it's being weaponized. Now let's take a closer look at how some countries are responding.
As regards the United States, like any other country, is a sovereign country, and they are entitled to take decisions in whichever way they want to, like ourselves. We are a sovereign country, and we can decide on any matter that has to do with our international dealings with others. And so it is within our right, as it is within their right. They have imposed tariffs, and we are examining the impact of those tariffs on us. And as the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition said, we will be able to state what our position is. So in the end, these are matters that we are going to continue dealing with in a very responsible and very, very proper manner. And we are not a government that will just act out of spite, and we are not a government that will act out of emotions. Everything that we do, we examine very carefully and look at the implications and the impact. So that is exactly what we are going to do.
Now, South Africa got slapped with a 31% tariff and is trying to keep things calm. Officials admit this basically kills off the benefits they had under AGOA, but instead of pushing back, they're going the diplomatic route, hoping to negotiate their way into some sort of a quota system. But here's the thing. Going the diplomatic route might not change the situation at all. Trump's had South Africa in his crosshairs since he returned to office in January. Why? The land reform law. The U.S. called it a property rights violation. South Africa called it internal business. The fight escalated fast. And by the end of it, South Africa's ambassador to the U.S. was kicked out, officially declared persona non grata. So with that kind of baggage already on the table, it's kind of hard to imagine an amicable outcome here, right? Even if South Africa is trying to play it cool, this trade standoff is layered with political tension. And history doesn't suggest compromise is coming anytime soon. Next, Zimbabwe. Now, Zimbabwe became the first African country to cave to Trump's tariff pressure by dropping all tariffs on U.S. goods. President Emerson Mnangagwa made the announcement in a statement posted to X, formerly Twitter, saying, quote, "In the spirit of constructing a mutually beneficial and positive relationship with the United States of America, I will direct the Zimbabwean government to implement a suspension of all tariffs levied on goods originating from the United States." On the surface, it sounds like a diplomatic olive branch, but let's be real. This was a huge concession, and it wasn't matched by anything from the U.S. side. No guarantees, no reciprocal trade deal. Just Zimbabwe saying, we're open for business, hoping Washington might take notice. And while the government framed it as a bold move to improve relations, many are asking, at what cost? Scrapping tariffs means local industries could get flooded by U.S. imports, making it harder for Zimbabwean producers to compete. It also means less revenue for a government already strapped for cash. Economically, it's a gamble, a big one. And politically, it looks like desperation. Let's be honest. Sure, Zimbabwe wants to re-enter the global economy, but is it wise to give everything away on the first move? And, it sets a dangerous precedent. Trump is jubilating right now. If one African country will cave this quickly, who's next? He's winning. Next, Lesotho.
We are not going to die. We will have to diversify and go to other markets. We have Africa CFTA as a market, South Africa also as a market under the SACU regime. We just have to diversify and go to other markets.
Lesotho got hit with the harshest tariff of all, a staggering 50% on its exports to the U.S. Now, for a small country whose economy heavily depends on the textile industry, this is nothing short of an economic gut punch. Here's why it matters. About 75% of Lesotho's textile exports go straight to the U.S., supplying major brands like Levi's and Wrangler. In that industry, it employs around 12,000 people, a big number in a country where nearly half the population lives below the poverty line. Now, Lesotho's trade minister, Mokethi Shelile, called the move shocking. And yeah, it is. He said the country was caught completely off guard, especially since they weren't given any warning or explanation from Washington. Yeah, and this is how every other country feels. But instead of lashing out, Lesotho is trying to keep the door open. They're taking two main steps here. Engage diplomatically. They're putting together a high-level delegation to travel to D.C. and talk through this. They've already reached out to the U.S. Embassy to ask what's going on and try to work out a way forward. And they're also diversifying their markets. Shalil said they are now looking seriously at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the EU as alternative export destinations. Yes, the goal is to make sure Lesotho isn't this exposed again, and that's smart. The stakes are sky high for Lesotho. The textile industry is the heart of the economy, employing around 12,000 people. And in a country where half the population lives below the poverty line, factory closures wouldn't just hurt. They devastate communities and deepen already tough economic conditions. And let's not forget, this is the same country Trump once referred to as a nation nobody's ever heard of. Remember that? Their foreign minister called the comment shocking and embarrassing. And you know what? The fact that tiny Lesotho, best known for stitching up America's jeans, somehow landed the highest tariff of any country on the list. Yeah, that totally screams carefully thought out policy, right? It's pretty clear this wasn't about strategy or impact. It was a blunt force, numbers-driven decision with zero consideration for impact or nuance. More like someone just ran the numbers, shrugged, and said, throw 50 on it. Why not? Next, Kenya. Now, Kenya is trying to turn Trump's tariff chaos into a calculated win. While the U.S. slapped a 10% tariff on Kenyan exports, that's still way lower than what some of Kenya's biggest textile competitors are dealing with. Vietnam got hit with 46%, Sri Lanka with 44%, and Bangladesh with 37%. And we just talked about Lesotho, which got 50%. So naturally, Kenya's trade minister sees an opportunity. He told Reuters that this could give Kenya an edge if U.S. buyers start looking for cheaper alternatives, and Kenya's door is wide open. But here's the catch. Just because the tariff is lower doesn't mean Kenya is ready to cash in. High electricity costs, taxes, and infrastructure issues still make manufacturing in Kenya about 20% more expensive than in places like Asia. So even with a competitive tariff rate, Kenya still got some work to do. Still, President William Ruto is leaning into the relationship. In a recent post on X, he said, quote, Kenya acknowledges the strong cooperation it enjoys with the United States of America. We commit to step up these ties, especially in the areas of trade and investment, food security, and stability in the Horn of Africa for our mutual success. And it's not just talk, because just weeks ago, Trump's senior advisor for Africa, Masad Bulus, visited Kenya. The meeting was part of ongoing efforts to deepen U.S.-Kenya ties and revisit the long-running trade deal that's been in the works. That deal, by the way, has history. It started under Trump back in 2020, then shifted into a broader framework called the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership under Biden. The idea here was to build a long-term, high-standard agreement covering everything from agriculture and digital trade to anti-corruption. Negotiations were moving along well until Trump returned to office and reset the table. So now, Kenya is trying to figure out where it stands. The Ruto administration is hoping that Bulos's visit signals the U.S. still wants to move forward with a deal. But, hey, with the global economy shaking and trade rules changing fast, nothing is guaranteed. Now let's turn to Ghana. During a joint press conference with Czech President Mahama criticized the unilateral nature of the U.S. tariffs. Quote, "It is unfortunate that without resorting to the rules-based system, one country unilaterally decides to increase tariffs across the world on all countries." He further emphasized the importance of multilateralism, saying, quote, "We must look at the broader global partnerships and the global interests rather than just our parochial national interest." Now, Mahama has directed Deputy Trade Minister Samson Ahi to make all efforts to address the problem. And right now, What they're doing is discussing options with the U.S. ambassador to Ghana, Virginia Palmer, who stated that the tariffs aren't targeted specifically at Ghana, but are part of a broader strategy to address global trade imbalances, and that perhaps Ghana could get some exemptions.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we talked about how the relationship with Ghana is very strong and how we can keep it going that way. And the sort of details of what these global tariffs are, and some things where the United States and Ghana can improve our trade relations.
We are in the lowest tariff regime. What does that mean to, between the relations that we have?
Well, I hope that it means that Ghana will have some benefit vis-a-vis its competitors, but we'll dig in and continue to talk.
Do you feel you've convinced the minister enough?
The minister and I are good friends.
So, yes, they're digging in and talking. We see where that goes. Next, Madagascar. Now, let's talk about Madagascar because they've been hit hard. The U.S. slapped a 47% tariff on their exports, the second largest on the continent. And the fallout? Immediate and severe. Madagascar's economy leans heavily on textiles, and this move puts the entire sector at risk. We're talking about an industry that employs nearly 180,000 people. And with this new tariff, at least 60,000 jobs are now hanging in the balance. The government isn't taking it lightly. They've launched diplomatic talks with U.S. officials, trying to figure out how this even happened and what can be done to reverse or reduce the damage. The Foreign Affairs Ministry put it like this. A constructive bilateral dialogue with U.S. authorities is underway, including technical discussions aimed at understanding the rationale behind the decision. At the same time, Madagascar is also working the regional angle. They're in talks with other African nations that got hit with similar tariffs, looking to build a coordinated response, which, by the way, is the right move. Now let's turn to Mauritius. Mauritius is no stranger to playing the global trade game and playing it well. But this time, it just got dealt a pretty rough hand. The U.S. slapped Mauritius with a 40% tariff. Now, for a country that's built a chunk of its economy on textile and apparel exports, especially to the U.S., this is a big hit. For years, Mauritius thrived under AGOA, sending duty-free clothing, seafood, sugar, and specialty goods straight into the American market. Now, that advantage is pretty much gone overnight. So far, the Mauritian government hasn't released an official response, but behind the scenes, trade analysts and business leaders are urging diplomatic outreach to Washington, as well as a quick pivot to market diversification, especially within Africa and Asia, to reduce reliance on U.S. buyers. Now let's move on to the most populous nation in Africa, Nigeria. Nigeria got slapped with a 14% tariff. Rather than retaliate, Nigeria is opting for diplomacy. Trade Minister Jumoke Odumole emphasized their country's commitment to engaging with U.S. counterparts and the World Trade Organization to find mutually beneficial solutions. She highlighted that over 90% of Nigeria's exports to the U.S. are crude petroleum and related products, with non-oil exports like fertilizers and agricultural goods making up a smaller fraction. So what this means is that the country isn't as exposed to AGOA as others, right? Because of this. But its non-oil sectors like leather and agriculture could still take a big hit. Behind the scenes, there's growing pressure on Tinubu to do something bold. Now, the Nigerian government is contemplating a review of its 54.9 trillion naira 2025 budget in light of potential revenue shortfalls stemming from the tariffs. Finance Minister Wale Edun stated that the economic management team is assessing various scenarios to mitigate risks and adapt. Now let's turn to Uganda. Although they got slapped with a baseline 10% tariff, Uganda is not holding back. President Museveni, in a fiery and brutally honest speech, laid out exactly what's wrong with the global trade system. And his message: Africa is not just losing money, it's giving it away.
I was meeting an American delegation just now, and I was telling them that please, the new government of Mr. Trump be clear on this point. When you export and process coffee, as we have been doing all this time, you get about $2.5 a kilo. The price is now a bit higher, but normally it was around $2.5 a kilo of very good coffee. What they call screen 18, the one with good seeds. When somebody goes and makes coffee, powdered coffee out of that, he may get as much as $40. Now, according to the present value of business in the world of coffee, the present value is $460 billion, the value of coffee business in the world. How much are the coffee exporting countries getting out of that? Only $25 billion. $460 billion, but all the coffee growing countries of the world, all of them, Brazil, Colombia, Vietnam, Uganda, Africa, you get $25 billion. Our wonderful Africa, out of that, gets $2.5 billion. And $1.6 billion of that is coming to Uganda now. But this is because of the high coffee prices. Normally Uganda gets about 900 million out of the 2.5 billion. So, now, if you take a raw material like cotton, so in other words, in every kilogram of coffee, Africa is donating about more than $20 to the rest of the world.
In every kilogram of coffee, he says, Africa is donating more than $20 to the rest of the world. And it's also donating jobs. He didn't stop there. Museveni broke down how Africa's over-reliance on raw materials, whether it's cotton, coffee, or iron, isn't development. It's dependency. See, cotton alone, he said, has 6 levels of job creation, from farming to ginning to spinning to garment making. But most African cotton is exported after stage 2, and the rest of the value and the jobs go overseas.
They're relying on raw materials, exporting. You are donating money and donating jobs.
And he's backing it up with policy. Museveni announced a total ban on the export of unprocessed minerals, including Uganda's high-grade iron ore. When foreign buyers offered to buy it raw for $47 a ton, he refused, knowing they'd turn it into steel and sell it for $900. His response?
Let them stay in the ground. When the grandchildren come, they will get them out.
Who? Now on trade, Uganda is now leaning inward and regional. They're doubling down on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the East African Community, working to build stronger African markets that don't rely on unstable global partners. They're also looking at Europe. The EU's ambassador to Uganda recently offered tariff-free access to Ugandan goods, provided they meet safety standards. Meanwhile, the Ugandan shilling is under pressure. Since the tariffs dropped, demand for US dollars has spiked in the interbank market, putting strain on the currency. That's got economists warning about rising inflation and increased import costs in the months ahead. We'll take a closer look at Uganda's story in another episode. Now, Rwanda. Rwanda's playing it close to the chest, but make no mistake, they're paying attention. Just days after Trump's new tariffs dropped, Rwanda quietly hosted Masad Bulus, Trump's senior advisor to Africa. The visit wasn't just a courtesy call. Bulus met with President Kagame in Kigali and reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to peace and stability in East Africa. But let's be real. Anytime a top advisor shows up right after a policy shakeup, there's more going on under the surface. The visit was framed around security and regional cooperation, but with the U.S. imposing a 10% tariff on Rwandan exports, particularly in coffee and apparel, you can bet trade was also on the agenda, even if it didn't make the press release. What makes this moment even more layered is Rwanda's history with U.S. trade disputes. Remember back in 2018, when Kigali banned secondhand clothing imports to protect its local industry? The U.S. responded by suspending Rwanda's AGOA benefits, hitting them right where it hurt. Rwanda held its ground then, and it hasn't forgotten. So while there hasn't been an official statement from Kagame's government about the new tariffs, don't expect a loud reaction. Rwanda tends to play the long game, quietly building alliances, strengthening regional ties, and focusing on self-reliance over handouts. Next, Ethiopia. Ethiopia is in a tight spot, and the government knows it. After the U.S. slapped a 10% tariff on Ethiopian exports, the Ministry of Finance quietly posted and later deleted a statement acknowledging the situation. They pointed out that compared to competitors like Vietnam and Bangladesh, Ethiopia got off relatively light and even hinted that this could be a window to attract more U.S. investments. Now, I released an episode on this, about this opportunity, this incredible opportunity that Africa has, so check that out. But the fact that the post was taken down says a lot. It's not clear whether the government is rethinking its message or just trying to manage public expectations. I think it's the latter. But on the ground, there's cautious talk of opportunity, right? Some analysts argue that Ethiopia could gain market share in the U.S. thanks to the lower tariff rate. But let's be honest, Ethiopia's got some homework to do before it can seize the moment. The country is still recovering from losing AGOA benefits during the Tigray conflict, a loss that gutted its once booming textile sector. And even now, political uncertainty, bureaucracy, and weak infrastructure continue to scare off serious investors. So even if the door is slightly open, Ethiopia might not be ready to walk through it. Now, this isn't just about tariffs, right? It's about leverage. So let's zoom in. What we're seeing right now across the continent is more than just a reaction to U.S. tariffs. It's a real-time test of Africa's trade mindset, economic independence, and, most of all, leverage. Some countries like Zimbabwe and Lesotho are folding. They're trying to stay in Washington's good graces by scrapping tariffs or pleading for relief. And others like Uganda, Rwanda, and Madagascar are pushing back or pivoting hard toward regional trade, warning that this is exactly why Africa needs to reduce dependency on single markets like the U.S. And then you have countries like Ghana, Kenya, and Mauritius who are walking the middle line, trying to stay diplomatic, assess the damage, and quietly shift strategy while keeping the relationship with the U.S. intact. But here's the bigger truth. These tariffs didn't create a crisis. They exposed one. They exposed just how vulnerable African economies still are when it comes to external demand, raw material exports, and low-value trade. The second someone in Washington sneezes, entire industries in Africa catch a cold. And the second prices dip or preferences change, entire sectors can collapse. That's why leaders like President Museveni are sounding the alarm. His message was clear. Africa isn't trading, it's donating. Donating value, donating jobs. And the cost of staying in this cycle is no longer just economic, it's existential. Because when you don't control the value chain, when you don't build industries at home, and when you rely on foreign markets to survive, you're not just exposed, you're expendable. So, what now? If there's a silver lining in all of this, is that the tariffs may finally force a reckoning. More countries are talking about regional integration, infrastructure investment, value addition, and trade diversification, not as a buzzword, but as survival strategies. The question is whether this moment will finally push Africa from reaction to reinvention. And in this time, the role of the AU, the African Union, becomes critical for this time. And as of this recording, there hasn't been any statement by the AU on any sort of coordinated effort to address this matter, how Africa is moving as a continent. You know, Prime Minister Barbados, Mia Mottley, delivered a powerful speech on behalf of CARICOM and Caribbean nations on how they are responding to Trump's tariffs. But there hasn't been such a response from the African Union, and that is troubling and concerning. But it starts there. And we need to hear how the AU is responding and is working with African nations to address this problem and to navigate it together as a continent, not as individual countries. That's it for today's breakdown. If you've been nodding along, shaking your head, or yelling at your screen, good. That means you're thinking. Because this moment isn't just about trade, it's about power and who gets to shape the future of Africa's economies. Whether your country is negotiating, pivoting, or resisting, one thing's clear. The old model isn't working. And maybe, just maybe, these tariffs are the wake-up call we've needed. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, share it with your group chat, and drop a comment. I want to hear from you. Which country do you think is playing this the smartest? Or better yet, what would you do if you were in the room with your president right now? Let me know in the comments, I'm in there with you, and I can't wait to hear from you. That's it for today's breakdown. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, take care. Hey, you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.